Yo, what's going on, Mike? Welcome to Bums in the Bleachers. It's going to be a very somber episode. I am one of your co-hosts, Trammy Sosa, aka the Dram Daddy on Twitter and IG, alongside my partner in crime, Mike Braznowski, the Praz Master. What's going on, Mike? How
Absolutely.
you how you doing? How you been?
Despite the way the Cubs have been playing lately, doing pretty well, and enjoying this scorching hot weather that Chicago's had that we were dying for all winter. Had a nice little road trip to Southwest Michigan for Father's Day. Me and my brother had a nice little, time together there, celebrating our dad, who's no longer with us, but doing it in kind of memory of him. And, it was his favorite road trip spot and, a place that he had wanted to live and buy a place, for a while, shortly before he passed. But it was a good time overall. Kind of glad I was there and not able to really catch a second of the Sunday Cubs game at all, which, wound up just being a disaster from kind of the early on in that game. But I'm doing pretty well. How happy Father's Day to you also.
Thank you.
And how was your Sunday with wife and daughter?
It was great, man. It was a pretty good weekend. So, unfortunately, I spent my weekend watching Cubs baseball. So, you know, it wasn't great outside of the win against St. Louis on Saturday. So
Okay.
yeah, so my wife actually she worked on Sunday, so we celebrated Father's Day on Saturday instead. So
Okay.
had a nice little family day to start. We went to go see Inside Out 2 with my we took
Ooh, I've heard
my
that's very
daughter.
good actually.
It's very good. I mean, Disney just continues to knock it out of the park and just finds just really creative ways to make some really great movies. And um it was great, man. I really enjoyed it. It was funny. I know we talked about it in past episodes, with June being men's mental health awareness month. I have anxiety, and one of the main characters in the movie that they
It's
added was
anxiety.
anxiety.
Yep.
um and so many like little metaphorical bombs that they would just throw in there where it's like, anxiety kind of took over the headquarters and stuff and kind of took the joy out of everything. um so it was very brilliant. I mean, it was brilliant the way that they did it. It was funny because anxiety is my daughter's favorite character now.
Oh
um
no.
and she's like, I love anxiety, and I was like, you're not gonna when you get older. So
No.
hopefully she doesn't have it, but who knows. I mean, it's
Is it still the
yeah,
same main like human character, like the girl that was like
it
the
is.
hockey
Yeah.
player? Okay.
Yeah, so it's her like progressing from like a young child to like a teenager. And the premise is like she is hitting puberty and going through like a ton of changes, like mentally and like emotionally, obviously. So but really well done. So I mean, it was great. We did that. My wife took her to like a local carnival and was like, hey, go have a day of like relaxation. So I laid on the couch, watched the Cubs beat the Cardinals, for one set of the three set that they played. Sunday, I spent some time with my daughter. We went to go see my pops, spent some time
Nice.
there. So it was a good weekend. I mean, all in all, just pretty relaxing. You know, uh, we'll talk about it later, but some stuff happened this weekend that obviously wasn't so great. But all in all, it was probably as good as it could have been, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, regardless of like what, how the Cubs would be doing it at any point this year, you know, Father's Day is always kind of a special time of year, whether, you're a father yourself or you're celebrating it with your father or, and in my case, my dad's no longer in my life, but still trying to
Right.
remember him the best I can. And, it's always, a time that, maybe you put baseball a little bit on the back burner for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know, well, yeah, definitely over this weekend, I think for sure, right? But I think like looking back, like I know this is a topic you wanted to bring, like, baseball for both of us really feels in a lot of ways synonymous with our fathers, right? Our dads.
Absolutely.
So I know you wanted to talk about your fave, dad moment with the Cubs, how that tied together. And, I've got a couple I can kind of talk through, but, I'll let you kind of lead off.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've talked about this before a lot on Twitter and Facebook, but just like you, grew up on the south side of Chicago, somehow
Yep.
became a Cubs fan. A huge
Mhm.
reason for that is because my dad is originally from the northwest side of Chicago, But he moved to the southwest side of Chicago because he was a Chicago police officer. The area that he moved to was an area that like became a pretty popular area for police, firefighters, teachers, city workers to move to, where they're kind of far away from downtown and the rest of the city, where they're not in where they work at. And in the middle of all that wound up being, on the southwest side around a bunch of like South Side Irish mouth breathers that all love the Sox and were all rubbing my face in 2005 when they won the World Series, that they won one before the Cubs did. But one memory that he always shared with me from when he was a kid was he and two of his buddies on opening day in 1969, pretty significant year for the Cubs, skipped school and went to the game and wound up going to see the Cubs win their first game in what wound up being, I think, an 11-1 start to that season. Obviously choked it a little bit down the stretch there, but there was a lot of hype early on in that season, and that kind of kickstarted it for him. Later that day, he did wind up getting the ass beating of his life from his mom, because right as he was walking in is when she was getting the call from school that he wasn't there. But in later years, him and I went to the second game of the 2015 season against the Cardinals, one that got pushed back because of some porta potty delays, if you remember how that season started, and there not being adequate bathrooms in Wrigley with all the renovations. And it just so happened that it wound up being April 8th, which was on the anniversary of that same day in 1969 when him and two of his buddies went and cut class that day. And it just so happened, too, that it was only the second game at Wrigley ever in which there were video boards, and they could show stuff like that on the video boards. And in the eighth inning of that game, in between innings in that game in the eighth inning, they flashed up on the video board on this date in Cubs history, Cubs walk-off home run, Willie Smith, 1969 against the Phillies. And he's jumping up and down like a little kid, all giddy, like, I was there, I lived that. So
I love that.
An awesome, awesome moment that I got to experience with that. That same day, we also, I should have uploaded these two pictures to it because it was a pretty special day with him. That was the first win of the season for the Cubs that year. They did lose the opener to the Cardinals in what wound up being a pretty special year. We wound up getting to meet, I think, Wayne Messmer, who sang the national anthem that day. And we also got a picture. It's a little bit blurry, and I'll share it with some people if they want to see it. It's a little bit blurry. But we wound up meeting Theo Epstein and getting a picture with him, which is honestly incredibly rare because he's not someone that really stops for fans and signs autographs and takes pictures if you ever come across him, really. But, a very nice gesture by him on that day, and probably my best baseball memory with my dad of going to a Cubs game together. How about yourself?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple. I mean, like we talked about it, like on one of our original podcasts, when we started this thing, like how we became Cubs fans. And I think that's where you and I bonded in a way where it's like, we're both Southsiders, we grew up in the South Side. My dad grew up by Bridgeport, and,
really South Side. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, he lived in Little Village for a long time and then moved to Bridgeport. And, that's where, it's just interesting, that he became a Cubs fan, right? And a lot of that was through like upbringing, and really like we are the only Cubs fans in my family on either side, my father and my mom's side. So we're alone, it's just my dad, my brother, and myself. And, I remember one of the first game that he took me to, I want to say I was about 8 years old. I remember they played the Astros back when the Astros were in the NL Central, and I want to say the Cubs won that game 4-2. And I just remember falling in love with Wrigley for the very first time, just walking into the cathedral and, all the smells and, the noise and the environment, and just fell in love with Wrigley and just became a second home. But I know there was I want to say it was either 2015 or 16. What year did Addison Russell get called up? Was it 2015 or 16?
2015. He 15? Actually, funny enough, I think if I remember this correctly, he wound up hitting his first career Major League home run before Chris Bryant did. despite the fact
Yeah,
that
that
he
sounds about
was
right.
called up first. Yeah.
Right. So we went to a game. We sat in the bleachers. I took my dad out to a game, and I remember Addison Russell hit a go-ahead double in the 8th inning in that game, and the Cubs won. And that was 2015 was like when that run of great Cubs teams started coming up. Where they started winning divisions, getting to the NLCS consistently. But yeah, that was a great memory of mine. But I mean, just all in all, I think I always tie just Cubdom with my dad. Like that. He's the person who instilled, for better or for worse, this curse or this privilege, whatever way you want to look at it, right? But he instilled that Cub fandom in me. So shout out to my pops, who, by the way, is going to be retiring in 2 weeks. So
Congratulations.
yeah, shout out to my pops, who's going to be able to hopefully relax. We'll see. Not great at it, but
have him attend some Cubs games with us.
I'll try to dig him up, man. See if he can do it. But he, I don't know if he's wanting to go to a lot of games, coming up here, because
you don't want to see it.
You don't want to see it, right? This is obviously a play on the "you have to see it," the Cubs slogan currently. But god damn, I can't do it anymore, man. I just can't. I can't do it anymore. I don't know if my heart or my mind or my body can take just the pain of watching how bad this team is right now, and just period, and I want to play a clip, and it's a couple minutes, so bear with me. But this was our preseason baseball extravaganza that we had with the main bums over at the Chicago Sports Bums. So this was a roundtable that you and I did with Baloney and HBIC.
Yeah. Hopefully this isn't a part where Dougie interrupted it in the middle of it and screwed up.
It's not. So this is part 2 of it. I had to go into both parts to figure out where. So shout out Dougie for breaking the internet that night. But yeah, so Baloney asked me the question, what were my thoughts? And this is also preceding your thoughts, which obviously we make the joke, you're the optimist, I'm the pessimist of the group. But we're going to see who is more accurate.
Here comes an L to me.
You want to hear the realistic side of it now?
Hit me with it.
Yep. Yum said it, man. This team is no different than they were last year. I fail to see how this team is going to be that much better than last year. And I get Craig Counsell was a big signing. And if that is supposed to be the move of moves to move the needle, man, there's some serious concerns, because I think they didn't account for health. Is the depth better? Questionably. And again, they have so many what ifs across the diamond. I think they're going to regret if first base doesn't pan out the way that they think it does with Michael Busch. They're going to regret it the second year in a row not fixing first base. If I know they had Garrett Cooper to play first, maybe DH a little bit too, and he's had some pretty good years too. But again, they really didn't fix the DH position either, which is go out, spend some fucking money, go get a bopper, go get a guy that's going to bat 220 and hit 40 home runs. They're out there. Guys like that exist. I just don't get the lack of moves that they've made. They, to me, have not even moved the needle. And then you go out and again, let's come back to the Craig Counsell thing, right? Yeah. Great X's and O's guys. I think what we saw last year was David Ross didn't manage the bullpen particularly well last year. Craig Counsell can. But this is another year where Jed Hoyer makes a hodgepodge bullpen again. There are no flamethrowers. There are no high strikeout guys. It's a bunch of ground ballers. Again, maybe Neris is that guy, but he really is a ground ball pitcher as well. And I think that they're going to continue to rely on these arms that are going to be pick and choose situations and hope that they get the ground balls and their defense picks them up. But come crunch time, you need those guns, man. You need the arms. You need the cannons, and none. Again, nobody. So I've got some concerns. I think this team should make the playoffs. And to your point, Praz, they should make the playoffs because the division is that bad. And that's not a good thing. It's not something we should hang our hats on and say, yeah, we should win this division because it's winnable. They should win the division because they're the Chicago fucking Cubs and they have the payroll to be the Chicago Cubs. And they're not.
Find the lies, Praz. Find the lies in what I had said 2 months ago, and we're seeing everything come to fruition. Find the lies, buddy.
There are no lies in that statement. I think the only lie in that was me having full confidence in Hector Neris, who is probably the most responsible person for, 3 of the last 4 losses, I'd say. So, no, you're spot on, and your concerns were accurate. I guess, I'm always going to be somewhat optimistic going into a season, especially coming off of how close they got last year and thinking that the big difference would be Craig Counsell. And, I thought it would be much better than this. I didn't think the bullpen would be nearly this bad. I had, if we pull some other clips from that same episode, I probably would have been talking about how confident I felt in Adbert Alzolay as the closer, how confident I felt in, Kyle Hendricks being a mainstay in the rotation all year, which, hey, he's back in the rotation. So going to see him start tomorrow.
Not because he earned it. But
not because he earned it. Right.
Literally have no one else to throw out there.
Well, it would be nice if they could just call up Cade Horton or
He's hurt.
Yeah, that's true. Shoot. Well,
so is Ben Brown. So it's like
Ben Brown. So is Ben Brown. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
They're hard to watch. I mean, every game that we've watched over the last week, I mean, I was watching yesterday and I think JD said it where it's like each heartbreaking loss you watch, you're thinking like, God, this is the worst gut punch of the season. And it just keeps happening over and over and over. I mean, game 1 against Tampa Bay, that was the game that you had said, last week that you thought was the only non-winnable game, right? From the 3, you're like, well, we're probably not going to win game 1, and that was the game that they were in position to win. That would have been a stolen win that series, and maybe that makes that whole series look different if they had pulled that game out. And that was the game that they lost, 5-2 because there's a 3-run home run given up by Hector Neris in that game. I think what's crazy to me too. Yeah, no, what's crazy to me too is, yesterday, I think they said it was either 28 or 29 games that have been decided by 1 run that the Cubs have played all year. That is an astronomical number for half a season, let alone an entire season. There are teams that don't see that number the whole year, and they've had 29 games that have been decided by a run. And I mean, it's just basically everything I said. It's bad bullpen, and it's a lack of just creating an offense that's going to be dynamic, right? It's just
right. I will say this. I do think that in looking back at, and again, you would like to think that this Cubs team would have had more talent than the Craig Counsell Brewers teams. But if you look at a lot of what those teams did, they way outperformed what their run differential was for every year. He never blew the competition out of the water when it came to run differential. Obviously, now
they had a bullpen though.
Right. They did have a bullpen. And I mean, the thing, another point with the run differential is a reason why I was so confident going into this season is because the Cubs run differential from last season was right on par with where the Braves and Dodgers and Phillies were. It just didn't really reflect in their record. And I thought that with a better in-game manager, which I still think we can safely say that Craig Counsell is a better in-game manager than David Ross is at this point. That would have made all the difference, and it hasn't been that way. I will also say too, there's no way I would have thought they would ever really be under 500 with Jameson Taillon pitching as well as he has. I mean,
it's wasteful.
They lost the last 2 starts he had, which were both are arguably gems. I mean, 6 innings.
Steele doesn't even have a win yet.
Yeah, Justin Steele doesn't have a win yet. He's pitched very well ever since he's kind of settled back in from being on the injured list. Hopefully gets on the board today. I mean, listen, this is a night where we are recording, and the trend has kind of been over the last few series that the Cubs win the middle game of the series. So maybe we did a good thing by picking tonight to record instead. Justin Steele being without a win, freaking, even, and this isn't really even a reflection of how bad they've been, how poorly or how greatly they've been pitching, but like the fact that Shota is only 7-1 when he's been as great as he had. He's only had like one really bad start up in Milwaukee. Everything else has been anywhere from
the White Sox start wasn't great either.
4 of those runs were unearned, though. I mean, it's splitting hairs, I guess. If you want to view it as bad, fine. But I would have thought they'd be in a way better position than they are now, considering like how good their starting pitching has been and what, the signs from last season would have indicated about where this team really should have been. And it just hasn't panned out that way.
So do you know who the major league leader in blown saves is for a team? The team with the most blown saves.
We're talking team stats. Oh, man. I remember hearing about who the leader was, but is it the Blue Jays? I know like the Cubs are like not the leader, but they're like top 3 for it. Or are they the leader?
The White Sox.
After last night? Oh, White Sox. That's right.
The White Sox have 20 blown saves this year. They are the league leader. And right behind them is the Chicago Cubs with 15. And I want to say this was updated yesterday. So after, what's today, the 18th? Or today?
Yes,
today's the 18th.
Yeah, June 18th.
So, you take half of those blown saves, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's 7 or 8 wins, right? And what are the Cubs? What's their record right now? I haven't even looked at it recently because I've just been so disgusted.
34-39.
So you're looking at a 41 or 42 win team, which would be either half a game or a game behind the Milwaukee Brewers right now in first place.
I
and maybe even better because some of those games could have been against Milwaukee too. So
I saw something float around Twitter that if like MLB games had only been 7 innings long this year, the Cubs would have like 49 wins right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and listen, you can't. What really hurt is Alzolay was not as good as, as he was last year, obviously, and whether that's injury or not, I think it's questionable, right? Like I think it's like he just like you can't. I didn't think that he was going to be that good this year. I had some concerns. You had a lot of faith in him, so I think we were both about 50-50 on Alzolay there, like between us, but. I think with Julian Merriweather going down, that was a bigger blow than I think we realized because that was your 8th inning guy who had a lot of success last year. And you were hoping that, again, team build on what ifs. You were hoping that he was going to take that next step and be a more dominant eighth inning guy than he was last year, which was pretty good. But, there's something I want to play here because I've talked about the construction of this team. And this was a clip taken over the weekend from President of Baseball Operations, Jed Hoyer, talking about the state of the Cubs. So I want to play this, and then I want to comment on this because I had some thoughts.
Point at which in the season that like you look outside for answers, but like if you think about what a 6-win player is worth a win a month, right? And like the collective is worth so much more than that. Like collectively, this group. Has it's kind of failed to produce for the last 46 games. Like we had a really good offense last year. We had a really good offense in April, and since then we have not hit. Period. And no one player is going to change that. We have to. This collective group has to figure this out. And like that doesn't mean there won't be additions, but the answers have to come from within.
So a couple things here. This interview really pissed me off because one, he said, this doesn't mean we won't make additions, which in Jet terms means they're not making any additions.
Right. Yeah.
And then to say that the answers have to come within is almost an indictment, even more so on Jed Hoyer because he didn't build within. There's no, again, we talked about depth. We talked about not fixing first base, not fixing third base. Defensively, they're worse than they were last year, and they're banking on being a team built on defense, and they've been trash defensively. Their bullpen is awful, which he didn't even mention. And again, that was, to me, it's like you're bypassing your own failures and not taking accountability for the fact that, you know what, in the offseason, I should have done more. The fact that Craig Counsell had to plead with him to sign Hector Neris. Counsell begged him to sign him because he needed somebody to fill out his bullpen, right? Because he didn't know who he had, or I don't think he had trust in any of these guys really, So I think, like, to me, like, when you're saying this has to come within, again, it's an indictment on you because you built this team, you built this roster. And I get maybe they're underproducing and they're not matching the back of the baseball card yet. And hopefully they do. But even if they do, there's still no superstar on this team. There's, he's talking about a 6-WAR ball player and, like, things like that. There's nobody even close on this team to being a 6-WAR ball player. And you still need those guys. You need a superstar. You need somebody who can carry you through these slumps when, the team is slumping, and you have a guy that can go up there and he's a bopper and can dig you out of a hole with like one swing of the bat where, look at Ian Happ, what he did the other day, right? They couldn't score runs. 3-run home run by Ian Happ. That completely negates like the way that you're feeling about that offense, the beginning of the game, because now you have 6 runs and you feel like you built a cushion, right? But there are no guys on this team that can do that. And that is completely Jed Hoyer's fault because he doesn't want to spend the money. And not only that, I should even take that back because I think what's embarrassing, they're 6th in baseball in payroll. They're 6th. And this is what you're getting out of it because it's not intelligently spent, which I think he thinks is what he's doing. Like, and the thing is, like, here, spending intelligently to Jed Hoyer means I'm getting a bunch of players for this money. Not necessarily great players, but maybe okay, goodish players. But I'm being able to, and I'm able to spread my resources out more evenly. And to me, that's intelligent. Whereas, like, maybe spending a little extra money on a Shohei Ohtani or like working through like, a trade for, Juan Soto or something like that, where it's like you're going all in on a guy that is clearly head and above, everybody else in baseball. And, somebody who's a consistent producer that's still young, but doesn't want to give more than an 8-year contract. That's, to me, is not intelligent spending to say, well, we're not giving somebody an 8 or 10-year contract because we don't want to be hamstrung later on. Because to me, like, that's an intelligent investment because you're spending it on a guy that's going to be there for 10 years and the face of your organization and is going to create more revenue because they're a face of an organization. Like, I'm not running out to go buy a Dansby Swanson, jersey right now. Right. Like, to me, that's not somebody I haven't bought a Cubs jersey this year because there's nobody on this team that I even give a shit about to go spend the money on.
To be fair on that point, though, you probably aren't buying a Cubs jersey regardless until they go back to the regular jerseys with the lettering on the back. Your point does still stand, though. There's no one on this team that, is on that level. To Brian S.'s point that he says a little extra for Ohtani, I think it was always kind of an inevitability that he was going to sign with the Dodgers.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Maybe that sort of offer was maybe a little bit unreasonable for any, like, it's one that, yeah, you would like to think that as a team in a big market, you could sign.
But to me,
I don't think you go from like where the Cubs were in their spending to signing a deal like that, as opposed to like, the Dodgers year over year had been giving out big contracts like that. But I do think, like you say, with, someone like a Juan Soto, who is going to be a free agent this year, that the Cubs need to be in on a guy like that. Like, that's a guy who is like in the conversation for best player in baseball, is in the is probably the best hitter in baseball.
Yep.
That would really change a lot of things if he was here. And, that the trade that the Yankees made to get him with the Padres is one that the Cubs honestly could have done, like, for not too much more of a similar package than what they traded to LA for Michael Busch. And not to say I don't like Michael Busch, but I'm just saying, like, you add a couple prospects here and there to that similar package, you probably could have pried Juan Soto from San Diego too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I say a little extra for Ohtani, again, I know you're paying a lot for him, but the thing is, like, it becomes almost, I don't want to say a wash because it's not a wash. You're paying a lot for this guy. But the marketability, again, having a face of the franchise, like all the revenue that those kind of guys create, it's making those owners a ton of money. So to them, it's like, yeah, in terms of payroll, it is taking a good chunk. But again, like if you're a billionaire and the Cubs have, quadrupled their worth over, the time that Ricketts has bought them to where they're at now, they're adding, so much around the ballpark, the DraftKings thing, marquee network, all the things that were supposed to create revenue for this team. They have the money. And I don't want to hear that they don't have the money, because to me, it's like, if you have that, reinvest in what you have to build it even more. And somebody like Ohtani was going to create more revenue for that team. So ultimately, yeah, it is a little extra because you're making money off of him. I mean, look at, dude, if Justin Fields could get marketability in Chicago for being an average or sub-average quarterback with all the, the Reebok, Dunkin' Donuts and things like that, you're telling me that Ohtani isn't going to get more sponsorships for being in a city like Chicago? So, and they're not going to go out and get these guys. They're not going to go out and do it. And they'll save face. They'll be in, the conversations because, that Jed is probably going to leak things to like, certain baseball writers to make it feel like they're in the mix. But we didn't even hear any offer that truly came out for Ohtani. Nothing ever came out that said that they offered Ohtani $500 million or anything like that, that they were in the mix and that he was interested in Chicago, but we never saw any of that stuff because I don't believe that it truly existed. I don't think the Cubs had any appetite to spend that kind of money because Ricketts he doesn't want to spend the money. So, it's incredibly frustrating. I think like all the things I said where it's like the concerns we had, they're all coming up and it's the same thing. Like this is, their record, I want to say, was very similar to what it was last year at this point, too. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, we've talked about it. I feel like Craig Counsell's probably bought some of those wins for them, too, where it's like,
yes,
they'd probably be worse. They would be even worse than what they're showing. But I know you started this poll on Twitter. I want to bring this up. So maybe some of the listeners can share some feedback on this, too. And are these Cubs in a worse spot today than they were in 2020, which was the year that they sold off Javier Baez, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo? They sold off their pieces. Yeah. So
it even started the offseason before that too, with like not picking up the option on Schwarber, trading away Yu Darvish.
Right.
Yeah. And the reason I asked this question more than anything, I mean, obviously it was smart to do what they did in trading away those guys at thank you, Gordo. Yes, I will try to keep my shirt on it. It is a bum shirt, by the way. For those who haven't picked up on this yet, too, I'm wearing a Blackhawks hat. I'm not wearing anything Cubs right now. This is kind of like my silent protest for like how pissed off I am at the Cubs right now. I may go to the game tomorrow and I may wear Cubs stuff there, but in terms of like when I'm not around Wrigley or going anything Cubs related, yeah, I'm not wearing anything Cubs for like probably until they get back above 500 if they do. Thank you for that tip, Gordo. So the thing is, like, they made those moves because they really felt the need that, in the years previous to that, 2020, 2019, 2018, in a sense, maybe in the 2017 NLCS, that the offense was not producing in the games that really mattered the most, whether it be in the playoffs or down the stretch in September. And I would say that, like, the motivation at that time was to try to rebuild the team to get back to a championship caliber level that they were in 2015 and 2016. And yet here we are, a few years later, and we hear Jed Hoyer go on the Score all the time or on ESPN 1000, whatever radio station your choice is, talking about how, like, their goal is to try to be like the Diamondbacks were last year and just sneak into the playoffs and just see what happens, and whatever happens, happens. And, I even bought into that bullshit going into this year. Like, I hate to admit it, but I did. Like,
I know you did.
Yeah. And who's to say what's going to happen this October? It could very well be another team that wins the NL pennant like it has been the last 3 years, where it's the team with the lowest win total that made it in. But that shouldn't be the standard that they set. And it's different from what was the motivation for trading away all those guys. And here we sit now in 2024, where all the guys that they did acquire from those trades, like, who's really made an impact at the major league level? You've seen flashes here and there from Pete Crow Armstrong, from Alexander Canario. You've had a cups of coffee from Caleb Killian. Other guys are still in the minors. Owen Casey has been in the minors the entire time, but looks to be doing pretty good and will probably be up at some point this season. But, that's just a couple of guys. Like, you rebuilt this minor league system mostly through guys that you drafted or were international signings or were other guys that you acquired by some other means. And for what it's worth, too, the guy that everyone has always been so hyped about is Pete Crow Armstrong, and we haven't seen it at the major league level with him yet. He may turn out to be a great everyday center fielder for the Cubs for years to come. I don't know if he's going to ever reach like the star level that he's projected to be at. The center field defense will probably carry most of his value. The Cubs could have just drafted him themselves in 2020 when they took Ed Howard in the first round. And granted, that was still when Theo was running things here.
Right.
But, point still stands. Like, everything that happened as a result of those trades in trading away Bryant, Baez, Rizzo, Kimbrel, we haven't seen any sort of impact on the major league field yet to this point. And this is also a point I had brought up, like when we kind of first started last year and the Cubs were like kind of on the ascent and kind of looking like they'd be a contender. On the day that they traded away, or the day before they traded away Rizzo and Baez, because I think Chris Bryant was the next day after that.
Yeah.
The day right before that, their record was 50-53. Another team that also had a record of 50-53 that same year was the eventual World Series champion Atlanta Braves. Now, I don't know that the Cubs still wind up winning the World Series, making the playoffs, winning the division, whatever, what have you. At the end of the day, you could have maybe pieced something together in 2021 if you had kept those guys together, because all it really was that motivated them to sell as much as they did was that bad 11-game losing streak after the combined no-hitter in LA. They were off to a really damn good start. And yeah, they all would have walked in free agency, but you would have had a little bit more of a deserving send-off than what those guys got. That last day that Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo were Cubs and they just sat on the bench the whole day, what the hell were we doing there? I don't know. This is me having the most revisionist history ever, but I don't feel like the Cubs are a better team. They're probably at about the same that they were at this time. Well, not at this time, but at the trade deadline in 2021. Organizationally, I think they're about where they're same. And I will say the minor leagues has improved greatly, but again, a lot of those prospects were just guys that they drafted. A lot of those prospects are guys that they signed on international free agency. PCA, Canario, the guys that, like I said, none of them had really made a significant impact at the major league level like we had projected them to and would have thought they would have by now.
Yeah. So before we move on, I'm going to just answer the question here. I am going to say that I think they are in a worse spot now than they were in 2021, and I'll explain why. So in 2021, I agree with you. I think you have a little bit of revisionist history going on here, where I think you remembered, an 11 game slide that ultimately broke this team up. I remember that there was about a 2.5 year slide of the offense being quote unquote broken from Theo Epstein, where they had given this team several chances to work through this broken lineup. They had this carousel of hitting coaches come through. Every year they fired and hired a new hitting coach. They switched out Joe Madden for David Ross, and nothing worked, right? And I think they ultimately made the right choices for the majority of these players. I think that, they offered Rizzo a deal that he ended up got very similar, that he turned down, that he got similar with the Yankees. Chris Bryant turned down a reported deal that Dave Kaplan spoke about, that it was about $200 million. Chris Bryant said he never got it, so who knows if it's true or not. Right. Again, I don't trust David Kaplan, when it comes to those kind of things. We already talked about that, but I think Chris Bryant wasn't going to. they weren't going to sign Chris Bryant. I think like we saw like the injury history and things like that. I think Javi Baez, they already had some concerns about, was he worth the money? And I think you see what he looks like in Detroit now. You know, nothing's really changed with Javi. He still swings at everything. He was always like that. I think, you know, probably more so now than it was with the Cubs, because I think he's pressing and things like that. But, you know, regardless, the only guy that I think that they should have signed long term that you can look back on and say, I think you could make Schwarber is one, because they never fixed the DH spot, and that dude is a built DH. Like that's what he is, right? And Mr. June is going off again in Philadelphia with, you know, his home run barrage, which God, we would be freaking killing for that right now.
I think I saw today he has now like 60 career home runs in the month of June.
Yeah, which I think is like 80% of his home runs or something like that. Something wild, right? So
yes.
Yeah, you know, and I think like Rizzo, you can maybe make the argument, but I think an aging first baseman with back problems.
Yeah.
I think
he's hurt currently too. So
yeah, and I think that, and yes, maybe he had a little bit of revival, but he's playing for the perfect team. I mean, he's literally playing for the perfect team for him right now. That I don't know if he would have been duplicating these numbers anywhere else had he signed anywhere else but New York. I mean, it's a short porch in right field. He's got protection up and down the lineup, you know. So I mean, that one I kind of am iffy. So to my point, I think they're worse now because at least in 2021, they picked a direction and they knew where they were going. They were going to have to rebuild this farm very quickly on the fly. And the way they were going to do it was by trading some of their best assets. And right now, there are no assets to send off now. So even if the Cubs wanted to be sellers, like who's buying? Like who are you buying? Yeah. Like I'm not buying Cody Bellinger right now because – you know, if I'm a team looking at Cody Bellinger, I think we're seeing what he's producing right now. He can opt in at, you know, whatever, I think was a 20 something, 25, 26 million a year.
For next year, it will be 30 million.
There you go. So, I mean, if you're another team, are you taking on that contract for what he is right now? Like, and not asking help from the Cubs to pay for some of that contract, because he's going to opt in. He'll opt into that contract if his year continues the way that it has. So, that would be the only player that I think has any kind of value. No one's trading for Dansby Swanson right now and the years and money that he has to. Ian Happ maybe could be a piece that you dangle because he's only got a couple more years and he's starting to get hot, but there's nobody. And the thing is, like, you can't be sellers right now.
With Happ, by the way, no trade clause for him. So he would have to approve anywhere he would go to.
Yeah. And you can't, like, literally, you can't sell right now, because if you sell, you're admitting that you didn't complete the rebuild and you're not actually where you thought you were going to be in terms of competing.
Right.
And now you're going backwards and you're saying to the fan base, oh, well, we need to rebuild and retool some more. When they just came off a year, they were one game from making the playoffs. Right. So I think they're in a worse spot when it comes to that. I want to go back to this. I have a parlay going tonight, Cubs money line. So Praz said it earlier. The Cubs traditionally win when we're on the air, so that might not be a bad bet to take. But also, I would also add to that parlay, take the under on runs scored in the first inning, because they have been really bad in the first inning. So, I'm just
And it partially did. You know what? Yeah, it's more Ross's coaching staff than it is Craig's, if you think about it, because. Still got like Tommy Hotovy here, and like most of his coaches did stay up in Milwaukee. Cubs. Wait, it was a guy with Steele, Webb, both 5 strikeouts. I
like that.
Steele is not a big strikeout guy, but could happen. I would feel a little bit better if he maybe had not.
He's been on a run.
That's true.
He's been on a run, and again, just I would maybe add the under and runs to that parlay. Maybe beef up your winnings a little bit more. All right, so we just got the news today that Mike Tauchman just went on the IL. This is yet another player going on the IL after Ben Brown went on the IL. Jordan Wicks came back from injury just to go back on the IL. So I'm posing the question. We joked about it, you know, for, I don't know, the last decade, we've had a new hitting coach just about every year. This is a crazy amount of injuries. So over or under, or who you place in the bet on, who gets fired first, the hitting coach for the Cubs or our trainer?
Like if I if I'm saying who I would want to get fired first, I probably would say the trainer, because I mean, I don't know what sort of influence the trainer might have in terms of like choosing whether or not to put a guy on the injured list or not, as we've seen them mess around with Nico Horner and like having him just sit on the active roster without playing. Kind of think it's just inevitable that the hitting coach is going to get fired, because that is always like the most common move you see for a team with a struggling offense that is tanking the rest of the roster. But I don't know. Where do you see things?
I mean, they just brought back John Maley, I think he's the assistant hitting coach now, isn't he?
Yeah, the main hitting coach is Dustin Kelly, who
I'm gonna take the hitting. I'm gonna take the hitting coach because I think it just falls in line with what they do. It's just blaming the hitting coach again for just bad roster construction. I don't care that the wind is blowing out. The wind has blown out. I don't know. I think 3 of the last 4 nights, and the Cubs can't hit. So
the wind was really blowing out during that Cardinals series all weekend, and other than the middle game of that series, the Cubs bats did not come alive. Although, the Friday game, I'm in the medical field, and the hammy and oblique injury is concerning. Yeah. Training regimen needs
Seiya Suzuki.
Yes, absolutely.
3 years.
Seiya earlier this year. Exactly. He's had multiple injured list stints already this year.
Maybe I'm leaning towards trainer now that I have a little bit more context. So.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
Good name, by the way. Bleacher Bum 23. Very on brand for this podcast.
All right. So,
go ahead.
Do you anything else you want to talk through here, or you want to move on to our next topic?
Well, I guess I would just say this, that unfortunate that Mike Tauchman goes to the injured list, because he had been honestly, among all the outfielders on the Cubs, he's the one that's kind of been producing, I wouldn't say the best, but like over the course of the entire year, there hasn't really been much of a dip in his production to where his like main line is. Like, he's always been just a steady Eddie, on base guy that will draw a lot of walks, will draw a lot of deep counts and everything like that. And, you can't always control where, the hits land and, how the umps are going to call balls and strikes. But the fact that you have a guy like that in your lineup that can at least make a pitcher work as much as Tauchman has over the course of this year, that's a huge loss for the Cubs. And one other thing to add on that too, why the hell is Miles Mastroboni the guy they call up to replace him? Like, seriously, have we not seen enough of this guy just be the most pathetic hitter at the plate in this organization over the last 2 years? Like, even just roster construction wise, Mike Tauchman is an outfielder. There's a pretty good outfielder down in Iowa right now, actually 2 of them, in Alexander Canario and Owen Casey. Wouldn't you think you'd want to call up one of those guys instead of Miles
Brennan Davis?
Or
Is he
healthy though right now? Because
he was when he was hot, and they still didn't call him up. So I mean,
I gotcha.
I don't know why they're sitting on some of these guys.
Guy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll end with this. Before we move on to our next subject, they're in a lot of trouble right now in a couple different ways here. They are too far out from the trade deadline right now to even make a move, because teams are not going to be rushing to sell to the Cubs right now, even if they feel like they're out, because they're going to wait as they get closer to the deadline to try to get the biggest return. So they can't even make a move right now to buy, even if they wanted to, because they're too far out. So they basically have to try to keep their heads above water here for another month and hope that they're in position for a wild card spot at that point to even think about buying. And the thing is, like, if they're not buyers, they can't be sellers either. So they're stuck.
Right. I mean, they're more than likely going to just remain as a buyer, because I don't think it is going to take, with how bad the entire, I shouldn't say how bad, with how like much of a glut there is between the top wild card spot in the National League and teams that are within 3, 4, 5 games of that. Like, I can't imagine any of those teams being sellers. Like, the only clear sellers in the National League at this point are going to be like the Marlins, the Rockies, and maybe the Mets. But the Mets have actually been pretty resurgent lately too. So they even have a better record than the Cubs right now. So, okay, never mind. Not the Mets.
All right. let's move on. We watched the game last night, and man, I feel like this. I don't know if it's just because it's more glaring and it's more topical, but I feel like the umpiring has been so bad this year with balls and strikes specifically.
Absolutely.
And again, and listen, I want to preface this because I want to come from the side, I'm obviously the pessimist between us two, right? And I'm negative Nancy, whatever you want to call me, right? But I'm gonna
I
come
think
from
we'll agree on this topic, though.
I'm gonna come from a point of empathy here, though. Okay, from a
Okay.
side of empathy for these umpires. The ball has never had more spin rate at any point in baseball history. So I get it. I'm sure it is an incredibly difficult job to call balls and strikes with the amount of movement, velocity, and spin that these pitchers are throwing right now. It's crazy.
In addition to that, there's never been a heavier emphasis in the catching game on trying to steal strikes by framing them. So,
Right.
yeah, to go along with that, too.
However, I'm going to play this in the background as we kind of talk here because we saw some of the most egregious strikes yesterday for both sides. This is about, again, closer, but still off the plate. There was one pitch that was in the batter's box, the other batter box that was so bad. Again, outside the zone, up high, down low. And I'm wondering if it's like, it almost feels like some of these umpires recognize that Angel Hernandez retired, and some of them are just trying to like take the place of being the most talked about bad umpire.
Right.
Look at this 4-pitch walk against Cody Bellinger. 3 of those strikes were in the strike zone.
Right. Yep. Is there like the really egregious one that was to Gomes last night coming up in this too? Because I remember like that was like insane. Like that was one where it was in the left-handed batter's box.
I think it was Patrick Wisdom. Patrick
Or
Wisdom.
Patrick Wisdom. That's right.
Yeah, he was in the. Yeah, that was JD almost blew his gasket. I think that was at the beginning of this one right here. Right there. That's the other
there you
box.
go. There you go. Yeah.
I think about 2 to 3 feet off the.
That's like that one Levon Hernandez playoff game with Eric Gregg behind the plate with how bad some of those calls were. That's
So
bring in the box, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know you're a big baseball fan. I know that obviously we both are because we do this show. But it's like I was really against the DH coming to the National League for a long time before it did, and have since changed my opinion. I think it makes more sense having the DH now in terms of like keeping pitchers healthier, especially with the amount of money that these guys make. You don't want them out there running the base pads. But so you're in favor, just to be clear, of robo umps here.
I would say that I'm in favor of either robo umps or like there are suggestions that I've had when talking with people over the course of the years that like I wish MLB would take matters into their own hand on. And like one of the things I've often suggested over the years before there was ever any thought of there being robo umps in baseball was, on check swing calls, you can go down to the first base umpire, go down to the third base umpire. They'll review it for you, get a second opinion. Why? You have an umpire standing right behind the pitcher at second base.
Yeah.
Why, on somewhat of a borderline pitch that was taken, can you not review it with him? He's viewing right into, the home plate area where the catcher would catch that ball. Why can't you appeal it with him? But, it would all honestly be way more foolproof with just the automated strike zone and the robot umps. And, it wouldn't be – I wonder how perfect it really would be when it comes to like measuring the strike zone vertically, because that's different for every player based on height.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it's something that needs to change now, or at the very least, the umpires that get calls as bad as Manny Gonzalez did last night when he was behind the home plate.
27 pitches that were incorrect.
Yeah. When you have that many incorrect calls that happen over the course of one game, a player has a bad game and he continues to have a bad game, he's going to sit for a while. If whatever. A pitcher goes out and he blows multiple games in a row, unless you're Hector Neris, apparently, because Craig Counsell gave him full vote of confidence to stay as a closer role. But on most teams,
no one else.
Yeah, on most teams, that guy's going to sit for a while, as we saw with like Kyle Hendricks. Why does that standard not apply with the umpires union? Having
That's
guys.
what you just said it.
Right.
You just said it. Union.
Well,
that's what makes it hard. Unless it's written into their agreement, you can't punish one of them without going through the union. So, you can
players get punished too when they have a union
written into CBA. So the bigger problem is probably the way that they have to draw up these contracts with umpires going forward, where there has to be some kind of discipline or accountability for being just that bad. I mean, the thing is, like I said, like borderline pitches, like I get that's going to happen. It's hard, man. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not trained in it. I know for sure I wouldn't be able to call balls and strikes. I'd be more afraid of hearing the sound of the baseball coming at me at 99 miles an hour. And I get it. Like I said, there's so much spin rate. There's, like you said it, there's so much framing that's going on. Pitchers are so far ahead of batters at this point in baseball history because of what they can do with the baseball and manipulate it, that I get it. It's hard to pick up, but my goodness. I mean, some of these are so egregious that, players get punished. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So,
but that's for a different reason though.
Yeah. And it's so egregious where it's like, man, even mid-game to be like, look, man, these are really bad calls. You need to sharpen and tighten up, your zone, because this is really rough. But I'm at the point now where bring in the robo umps. I think like they're starting at AAA.
It'll start in AAA, I believe, a week from now. June 25th is when they're going to officially implement them, and hopefully they're not far behind for the major leagues at that point.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to our fun exercises and topics, because at this point I'm ready to I'm so pissed off from our ranting that I'm gonna need to breathe a little bit before I watch this next shit show. So let's get to about 7 minutes. All right, so let's do player A, player B.
For sure.
Praz set these up for me. I have not seen these until now. He sent them over to me right before the show, so I haven't had no time. For anybody that's just watching, we will highlight two different players. I or Praz will pick who we would start, who we would bench based on statistics and alone. Don't know who it is. We're going in blind. So, Praz, go ahead and read off player A for me.
So, and just to further that, this first set of players is current players that it's what their statistics are this year. So this is player A. He is currently hitting 209, has an OBP of 266, 356 slugging percentage, a 622 OPS, 9 homers, 30 RBI, 36 runs scored, 21 extra base hits. Stolen base attempts, he's 1 for 3. He's drawn 20 walks. He's taken 67 strikeouts. Weighted runs created plus of 76. That's to say that 100 is league average, so he's 24% below league average. And a negative 0.5 baseball reference WAR. And then we have player B, who is currently hitting 208 with a 286 OBP, 343 slug, 629 OPS, 6 homers, 19 RBI, 28 runs scored, 16 extra base hits. He's 4 for 6 in steals, 22 walks drawn, 62 strikeouts, 81 WRC plus, and that's actually supposed to be a positive, not a negative 0.64. So not a negative 0.64. It's positive 0.64. So yeah, as opposed to the first player who had a negative 0.5. So between those two stat lines, who you starting? Who you sitting?
The first player I thought, Brian here said Christopher Morel, and that's who I initially thought. But I think Christopher has double-digit home runs, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
He does, yes.
Yeah, so it definitely took it. I think he's got about 13 or something.
You go ahead. I'll double check that for you, but I know he's in double digits for sure.
Yeah. All right. So
13. Yep. 13 and 40 were driven in.
These look like two middle of the order Cubs hitters.
One of them might be.
Okay. So batting average similar, on base a little bit better from player B, slug about the same, OPS very similar, less home runs, but and less extra base hits. Better stolen bases, less strikeouts, higher weighted runs created plus, and WAR is 0.6. So I'm assuming their WAR is coming from defense because it's not coming from their offense. Correct. So I think I know player B.
Okay.
Is player B Dansby? Because that's who I'm going to go with. I'm going with player B.
Player B is Dansby Swanson, like you said, middle of the order Cubs hitter. You're starting him, and that's between these two. That's probably the choice I would have made. Player A is someone who used to be in the middle of the Cubs order, who somehow, despite these numbers, is 6th in All-Star voting and among National League outfielders. That would be Nick Castellanos of the Phillies.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. Nick Castellanos right now has the 6th most votes. With that amount, he would be an all-star with those numbers.
Okay, that's frightening, and just shows you how stupid fan voting is for all-star game. So
yes.
And the reason I picked this over player A was really just the on base was better. The plus WAR, I was assuming defense, so which is surprising because I didn't think Swanson was a plus and WAR defensively, considering the way he started the year. But
right. and he's been better. He has picked it up a little bit better, but I do think maybe some of the time that like Nico wasn't in the same middle infield with him when he was hurt might have affected him. Maybe there were some balls that he thought Nico would get to that he didn't get to. But I mean, as of right now, like if you actually split it between offensive WAR and defensive WAR, he is positive in both, which I'm actually surprised he's somewhat positive in offensive WAR. But that does actually speak to how depressed of a hitting environment it is across baseball this year. Yeah, fan voting is terrible. Vote for I've seen that going across White Sox Twitter very heavily with Martin Maldonado. I remember in 2016 there was like a little bit of a campaign to get David Ross into the All-Star game, but when the Cubs had like 8 other guys who were All-Stars on that team, it was a little hard to squeeze him in there.
Yeah, right. All right.
Gotcha.
Player A, player B for career per 162 game.
Right. So this next set, sometimes it would be retired players, but in this set, these guys are both still active. So
pitcher, all right, cool.
Yeah, pitcher A, we have an 11-8 record, a 3.29 ERA, a 1.241 career WHIP, 175 innings, 179 strikeouts, 55 walks, 18 homers allowed, 162 hits allowed. An ERA plus of 131, so 31% better than league average, and he averages 3.1 Baseball Reference WAR per 162 games. And then we have player B, also a pitcher, with a record of 13-10, and this is per 162 games on all these stats. 3.36 career ERA, 1.175 WHIP. Averages 200 innings per season, averages 182 strikeouts, 47 walks, 14 homers, 188 hits, a 121 ERA plus, and 4.2 WAR on Baseball Reference. So between those two, who you starting, who you benching?
I have a feeling you're setting me up here, but I think I'm going to go with player B just because I think the ERA is slightly above player A, but the WHIP is lower, more innings, which, I mean, God, how many times do you see guys even hit 200 innings anymore? It's just like...
Absolutely. I think there were only about 5 across baseball all of last year.
Maybe. Yeah, right. So, and then, strikeouts obviously higher at 182. I like that. Has less walks, so obviously that helps the WHIP. Less home runs given up, more hits, which is crazy, but interesting that the ERA plus is only 121 considering WHIP, strikeouts, and everything else is lower and has a higher WAR. But yeah, I'm going to go player B.
Player B. Okay. So funny enough, these two pitchers that you see is the pitching matchup tonight at Wrigley Field. Player B is Logan Webb of the Giants. Player A, Justin Steele of the Cubs.
I knew you were setting me up.
Yep.
But...
Well, you know what? I mean, I don't think you can really go wrong with either one. And I want to say Logan Webb last year finished second in Cy Young voting, and Justin Steele finished fifth. So, again, can't go wrong with either one. I think between those two, I'd probably pick Logan Webb as well. But, you know, the preferred choice would probably be the Cub.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right, let's do our next segment, On This Day in Cubs Baseball History. So this is a segment where, you know, if any of you know Praz, he is an encyclopedia of baseball knowledge, stats, and just crazy, can pick things out of the air and like, oh yeah, I remember that back in October of 2001. So it's it's awesome. So I'm going to try to see if you can guess this.
Okay.
So on this day in Cubs history, the Cubs play the Detroit Tigers, and Kenny Rogers records his 200th career win. So that maybe gives you a little idea of the year or the timeline.
Okay.
Third baseman Aramis Ramirez and catcher Henry Blanco go yard, but the Cubs give up a Tigers club record 8 home runs in this game. The pitcher returning from the IL in his first start gave up 3 of those home runs in a 6-run inning.
Yep.
The Cubs ultimately lose 12-3. Who was the starting pitcher for the Cubs in that game?
I didn't remember this until just perusing through Baseball Reference maybe a few months ago, but yeah, this was Mark Pryor. It was one of his first starts back off the injured list in 2006, and one of his last actually. He I think he only pitched maybe 5 more games the rest of that year, and he stuck around in the minors a few years after that, but that was the last year that he ever pitched in the major leagues.
Yep, that was the downfall of Mark Pryor, and I was going to give you a hint just in case you needed it, but I didn't think you were going to need it, so
for sure.
Grass strikes again.
Yeah, funny enough that now that you bring that up about him being the pitching coach, I made a really kind of, I don't know, a little over the line tweet, but a lot of people found it funny. Last year when the Dodgers were in town, there was some pitcher on the Dodgers that wound up getting pulled because of an injury or something or discomfort or something like that. And obviously Mark Pryor came out to the mound, and I said something to the effect of, "It just feels right that Mark Pryor is out on the mound at Wrigley Field with a trainer."
Yeah. All right, we are going to jump into one of our second to last segment of the day, and our flying the W's and taking the L's. So,
hello, you play to win the game.
Addison is next. Doors open on the left at Addison.
I say one thing. Go. Let's go. That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
Is a L7 winning.
all right. So I know I have a W I'm going to say for last, but quickly I'll go through my L's. If that's cool. But
Go ahead.
I got a couple L's, and I know we were kind of talking pre-show. Really, I think it's just the NBA and NBA fans get the L this week. Now, let me explain. One, I don't know about you, but I can't watch NBA games all the way through anymore.
No, with all the timeouts at the end and everything, it's a painful watch.
The league is soft. Nobody plays defense. Boston played pretty good defense, but so let me take that back. But there are a lot of guys that don't play defense, i.e. Luka Doncic, who is absolutely trash on the defensive end. I mean, just absolute butt. I can't, and I don't like Luka. I have never liked Luka. He's a great scorer, but he's a crybaby because this league is all full of entitled crybabies, poor defenders, and lazy defenders. Just really shitty basketball to watch because all I'm seeing is just guys that just run, penetrate, kick out to the open 3-point shooter, shoot, run to the other end to play defense, and then do it all over again. So it is just, it's so hard to watch. And then the other part of this, like the NBA fans part of being taken the that we're losing TNT's pre and post game show with
and Charles Barkley retiring too.
And Charles Barkley retiring, because to me, like, that was a big part of why I watched basketball, because of that show. They were so great. They're so funny. It was such a great show. It's going to be really sad to see when, TNT loses its rights and they're going to be gone. Ernie said he's not going anywhere. He doesn't want to leave TNT. Chuck is saying that he's going to retire after the next year. So unfortunately, NBA fans get the L, because the best part of watching this shit league is going to be taken away. So L to NBA and their fans.
That's pretty fair, honestly. And I mean, if you need no better example of that, look, right here in Chicago with the Bulls. I mean,
oh God,
we can go on and on about how incompetently they're run and everything like that, and them beating the Atlanta Hawks, which led to the Atlanta Hawks getting the number 1 pick. It makes you wonder, like, does anyone want to play defense in this league anymore? Because like you look on the Bulls right now, like the top 3 scorers they have in DeRozan, Levine, and Vucevic, like, don't play like a freaking defense.
None of them.
Yeah. So, what? It's I barely watched any of the NBA Finals. Congrats to the Boston Celtics on winning their title and reclaiming, like, being like the Yankees of basketball again, because I think they have the most titles again after the Lakers had tied them a few years ago. But yeah, good call on your L with the NBA.
You got for your W's and L's.
So I have 2 W's, 1 L, and we can alternate if you'd want. But a huge, well, both my W's are somewhat in-house a little bit here at the Bums. One big W would go out to our fellow, coworker Aaron, who referred me to a post on Instagram of this person who is a big bourbon account, Bourbon Cuse, that was giving away a ticket to this upcoming Sunday's Cubs game in Section 23. That'll be the day that the Ryan Sandberg statue will be unveiled. So looking forward to being there for that and seeing the statue unveiled.
Nice.
Has got a really nice seat for that. All he's asking is that I pay for all his drinks. So Bourbon Cuse and Aaron, big W to you guys for that.
Very nice.
And another W in-house also, I'm going to say Bologna. Great job last night with friend of the show, Beef Loaf from the 108. It was his birthday. Did a special show where Bologna was the guy asking all the interview questions, and it was a very good listen and gave good insight to I'm sure if you showed your dad this, he would probably appreciate it, because if you don't know Beef, like him and his brother Teresi, they have lived in Bridgeport their whole lives, obviously big Sox fans, but just what life was kind of like for them growing up in Bridgeport as not white kids. They're both Mexican as well. So
All that.
Yep.
And then who do you have for your L's?
One big L, and it came to bite me real bad yesterday on the way home, or not yesterday, I'm sorry, on Sunday. On the way home from my road trip to Michigan, wound up on I-94, and in the middle of that, getting a flat tire right as I was getting into I somehow made it to a gas station in Lake Station, Indiana. For those who don't know, that's a town just to the east of Gary, which thankfully it happened there and not in Gary, because don't want to really be spending a lot of time over there. But Indiana Department of Transportation, L to you for not keeping your roads either clear or without potholes or whatever. So, especially with all the money you make from the freaking toll road. Come on.
Yeah, that money ain't going to the roads, man.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, I'm gonna end up with my final W. You and I talked about this, a little bit before the show, and so in 2016, I shared this on Facebook. So in 2016, the Cubs go down 3-1 in the World Series, and I think for a lot of us, it was doom and gloom time. It felt like every other year that the Cubs had choked. choked away any opportunity they had of winning a World Series, right? At 2003, they choked away that series. 2007, 2008 was just they got swept in 2015. So I think 2016 felt like, God, here we go again, right? And when they went down to 3-1, I was just negative, man. Clearly I'm, and that's tough to believe because I'm the most positive person in Cubs history.
Absolutely.
But I was just in a bad place. And, there was one person who reached out to me and said, don't worry, if there's any team that could come back from this, it will be this Cubs team. They are the best team in baseball. They have been all year. They've done this. They're the comeback team. Like, they'll get it done. Like, breathe. Like, don't worry. The series isn't over yet. That person was my Uncle Tony. And my Uncle Tony passed away this Saturday, unexpectedly, suddenly. Uncle Tony is also Johnny, my cousin over from the main Bums. It's also his uncle as well. So my uncle was, if people don't know, my mother and Johnny's mom are twin sisters. This was their brother. Biggest Sox fan I've ever met. And, but also, and at that time growing up, again, I remember I reminded you at the beginning of the show, I was the only Cubs fan in my family on both sides. So I've always been surrounded by Sox fans, and not the nice kind. Most of my family Sox fans were not the nice kind growing up.
Not like Uncle Paul, who is a Sox fan, but is one of like the very nicest ones.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And I will say, like, maturity obviously changes things where you kind of take the meatheadedness out of it, right? But, like Johnny, my cousin Johnny, was not the best Sox fan growing up. He was definitely a Cubs hater. And a couple of my other cousins, my uncle was a big Cubs hater, who passed away. But he still texted me during 2016 and reminded me, like, hey, breathe easy. And it was the most calming, message that I got, where I was like, you know what? He's right. If he's saying this, he's got a perspective that's, removed from the emotion and can think clearly and straight. And it calmed me. And then they rattled off 3 wins in a row to come back and win the World Series. And, he was super supportive, and happy that, myself, my brother, my father got to see that in our lifetime. He had backed off from the Cubs hater stuff, like, as he got older too. And, he was also a big supporter of our podcast when we started it. I didn't really see him a lot, as we got older and he got busy with life and things like that, unfortunately. But my dad would always tell me that he'd be like, hey, I listened to you, to Johnny's show, and man, it was like really great show. They're great, like, he was just a big supporter. So, shout out to him, rest in peace. It was a very sad weekend, for our family, but, we know he's in a better place. And it's a story that I'll always remember from him, is that the calming voice during that time was a diehard Sox fan who hated the Cubs. And, it was my uncle. So, shout out to my Uncle T, and like I said, rest in peace.
Shout out Uncle T. Condolences to you. Condolences to Johnny, your entire family.
Thanks, man.
That's a great story, and it's weird to think like that was like the voice of reason for you, in the time when you had like the most doubt you could possibly have in the Cubs. Yeah,
I know, most uncommon of places, but it was again, it's something I'll always remember,
for sure.
All right, let's wrap up here. We're talking about the weekly predictions here. We got 2 more against the Giants tonight and tomorrow, and then the Cubs will play the Mets at home for 3 games before they go to San Francisco to play the Giants again. So they've got 5 games in the next week before we reconvene, and I'm going to say they go 1-4.
Oof. Well, you're probably right to think they're going to lose more. I will be slightly a little more optimistic, and I'm going to say 2-3, just because It has been the trend of every series for the last few for them to only win the middle game of every series. So, 2-3 over the next 5. Hopefully a little bit better than that. Yeah.
I'm going to say 1-4 just because I think they win tonight because we're live tonight. So they have to win tonight just to keep,
Yes. Correct.
Keep that going. But I think they'll lose the series to San Francisco, and I think they get swept by the Mets, who you said are playing very good baseball right now. And I'm predicting that Pete Alonso is just going to wreak havoc in Wrigley the next 3 games. So because he was not great in the last series, and he's traditionally hit the Cubs very well, and he's probably going to show the Cubs like, you should probably trade for me.
Can some team please just trade for him this week, please, to get him out of our lives? And again, Mets are probably not going to be sellers because they're in a much better position than the Cubs are right now. So
I don't know. They're pretty far out of the East. I mean, Phillies are running away with it. So
true, but I just meant everyone all bunched up in the wild card race.
Yeah,
right now.
that's true. Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate everyone joining and commenting in the sections with us. We'll hope to be back next week. We'll see how it goes. I know I'm going to be traveling for work next week, so I got to see how that lines up with my schedule. But and also we've got to see how baseball goes because it's getting hard to talk about this team. So
right,
I know how.
They have to space this out eventually.
Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate it, everyone. Thanks for joining. Bums in the
Thank
Bleachers.
you, everyone, for joining us. Truly appreciate you all listening and watching.
And hopefully fly the W this week. Maybe a little bit.
Maybe.
Just a little.
See. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Go Cubs.
Go Cubs.